This is everything that we need to build the most OP Subaru engine I have ever built. The target for this EJ is about 600 to 650 wheel horsepower going in my 1998 2.5 RS that we are converting to a P25 22B RSTI. I don't really know what to call it anymore. The car has just gotten out of hand. Before we start building, let's actually go over everything we have on the table. Right here is a set of seasoned EJ25 case halves, seasoned being that they've just been used. We sent these down to Outfront Motorsports where they bored and honed these to a 99.75 millimeter piston. They closed the decking surface on this. I also had them go to the extent of replace all of the breathers on this engine with AN, and you guys will see why I had them do that here soon. They did a block detail, they checked the main line, and this checks out perfect. On the opposing side of the table, we have all new case bolts. These are actually just OEM Subaru case bolts. You can go to the extent of using ARP. They do make a stronger fastener for the cases, but for 600 to 650 wheel, we don't need them. For internals, we have a set of Manly H-Tough connecting rods. For pistons, we actually have a set of Manly Sport Compact 99.75. These will be perfectly fine for that 600 to 650 wheel goal. Now, the thing with pistons is whenever I do these engines and I send that short block out to the machine shop, these pistons become married to that engine. They are that engine is bored and honed to these pistons to get piston to wall clearance ideal and perfect. So you can't just take these pistons and put them in another, I mean, you can take these pistons and put them in another engine, but I really wouldn't suggest doing that. Rear main seal kit and air separator plate for the back of the engine. Bearings, we're gonna be using King P-Max rod and main bearings, pretty much what I use in every engine if I can. We do have that engine over there drilled for 1/2 inch head stud, so we do have a 1/2 inch head stud kit as well. I wanna abuse this car. This engine's gonna have fresh air anti-lag, a whole bunch of other stuff, so we do have some stronger fasteners to make sure that the head does stay down to the block. And then finally, for the crankshaft, we are using an OEM STI nitrated crankshaft. First thing we need to start with is bearings and finding our clearances before we start assembling absolutely anything, because we need to make sure that these bearings will give us the clearances that we want out of this engine. We have to measure the crankshaft. We need to put our bearings into the engine, torque the engine down as if it were being assembled, measure our clearances based off our crankshaft, and then find out if we're good or not. The brand new Subaru crankshaft. In the crankshaft. That way we can get accurate measurements off this. Spray it down and then wipe it down. We're gonna take our micrometers and we're gonna measure out the crankshaft, and we're gonna find out how big each journal is. Once we know how big the journal is on the crankshaft, we can compare those numbers over to the numbers of what the bearings measure out in the engine to find the difference. Once we know the difference, we know our bearing clearance. So for this, we'll probably target between 2 and 3 thou. I'd like to land more around like 2.5 thou for this engine, but we'll see where we're at with our bearings. If we need to order more, we'll order more, but these are very critical to make sure that they are properly calibrated. I use Minotoyo for a lot of my stuff when I was in aviation, and I did QC in aviation. Minotoyo was the standard, so Minotoyo is still the standard. Crankshaft measured out. One thing, just make sure that you guys are using the outside of the thimble when taking these measurements. If you use the inside one, you can force it and get false readings and then damage the crankshaft. So if you guys are looking for like a detailed how-to on how to build these things, I'll link it down below or put a little card right there if you want to do this at home. So with our crankshaft measured out, we've got all of our measurements. Front main, all the mains came in relatively closely at 2.36160, somewhere in that range. All of the rod bearing journals came in around 2.0461. This is the most, in my opinion, time-consuming part of an engine, is verifying all your measurements and making sure that everything is to spec. But with our connecting rods here, normally when you get connecting rods, they're gonna come in a box like this. The little end on these, 180 grams, 181, 181, 181 grams, 391, 391.6, 391.5, 391.0. So all of these are pretty close. If you want to go to the extent, you can pull material off of these, but you will need a connecting rod scale. It's a fun little scale that holds up one side of the connecting rod and weighs the other side, but for this, I don't see it being necessary. Just like everything else, we need to clean all the oil off. We need to grab our rod bearings. get the rod cap off of the rod, put the bearings in, torque the rod cap back down, and then take the measurement on that rod. There we go. Tang goes to the tang, and then you slide the bearing in, line it up, make sure it sits flush. Do the same thing on the opposite side. Tang goes to tang. Tang to tang. Hootie tang. This is the fun part because now we need to torque these down to 55 foot-pounds and check the clearance on it. Try to do them somewhat evenly here. For the bore gauge, we're gonna roll it in here and zero it. Right there, we have our bore gauge zeroed. So now our bore gauge is set up to 2.04165, which is what we measured off of the crankshaft. And as we put this in, we hold everything where it's supposed to be, nice and vertical to the rod. We are sitting at about 2.5 thou of rod bearing clearance. Right at about 2.5. Which is perfect. That's exactly where I want this, 2,500, 0.0025 inch, and that is rod bearing clearance for bearing number 1. And I'm just gonna write number 1. What we just did for this one, we need to do with the other 3 to make sure all the clearances are good between them all. Once the clearances are good on the rod bearings, then we can jump to measuring the main bearings. All of our rod bearing clearances checked out perfect. They were all honestly right at 2.5 thou, which is beautiful. It's exactly where I want them. Now we need to do the block. And the block is a little bit different of a story because this is obviously used. The crank is new, the bearings are new, so there's gonna be more deviation in a used part that's been seasoned versus a brand new crank, brand new connecting rods, brand new bearings. All of those should be pretty standard. So on this, it's gonna be the exact same process. I've got the torque sequence here on my computer. What happens when doing these is you have to take the block apart, clean everything, put the bearings in, clean the bearings, put those in, and then torque the block as if you're assembling it. So all 50 of these bolts, it's not 50, it's like maybe 15. All of them have to go in, get torqued down in a very specific order and a very specific torque sequence, and then followed by an angle. Now I did just buy a snap-on torque wrench that actually reads in angles. For the longest time, I've just been doing it with a breaker bar and then eyeballing where the angle is. So now we can actually be exact. And that, dude, I got that for 300 bucks. Snap-on half-inch torque wrench for 300 bucks. It's been calibrated recently. Money. eBay auctions. Engine checks out beautifully. All of our main bearing clearances come in for the number 1, 2 thou, 2.5 thou, 2.25 thou, 2.5 thou, 2.5 thou, 2.5 thou. So all between 2 and 3 thou, which is really what I was shooting for. I'm actually gonna set the engine aside for now before we start taking it back apart because we need to torque down the rods onto our crankshaft. And then once we have the rods on the crankshaft, we can take this apart, get the crankshaft in here, seal everything up, get all our O-rings in, torque it all back down into one cohesive engine. Then tomorrow we'll do pistons because I had to wait for a new piston ring grinder, and for some reason nobody sells those locally. Now it's time to tear this back apart, prep this for our crankshaft to go in, then seal this thing up permanently. So we need to take all of the case bolts out in the opposite order that we put them in. Now that we have the block assembled, it's time to jump into the pistons. Now I kind of just zoned out to get this done. Pistons are, in my point, they're not hard, but they're just annoying to do. It's always the oil control rings that catch me up. But for this, we are getting our top ring set up first. If you're ever curious, you're gonna have 3 sets of rings. Typically, you're gonna have your oil control rings, which are gonna be the bottommost ring, your oil scraper ring, which is gonna be your middle ring. It's typically a gray or darker color. Then you're gonna have your compression ring, which is going to be the more silvery, bright-ish one. This can vary depending on what piston you do use, but for the most part, they'll all follow the same principle. So we got our tolerances set up. For this engine, I decided to do 15 thousandths on the top ring and 18 thousandths on the oil scraper ring. The oil control ring, you do not need the clearance. Once those were done, we got that piston slapped in, got the wrist pins installed, put the wrist pin clip in, and then I jumped to doing the other 3. We have a fully functional EJ short block now. I did build this engine a little bit tighter than I would for some customers, but that's all right. I'm doing a little experimenting with this one, but I am hyped. It feels nice and smooth turning it over. No hiccups, no grabs, nothing like that. Like I said, it does feel a little bit tight, but that's about it. But now we get to go to the part that's going to actually make this an OP engine. We have a full Roger Clark Motorsport dry sump going on this engine. Now what a dry sump does is it replaces the oil pan, the oil pickup, and the oil pump, and replaces it with scavenge pump. So if you look at our oil pump here, it's nothing. It's just essentially a plate. We've got things like water pumps, timing pulleys, plugs, the dry sump itself, a whole bag of hardware, the pulley for the timing to actually drive the dry sump. So this does work off of the timing pulley, so it'll kind of just go in accordance with that one. I am so excited for this. This is where this EJ becomes OP. Now, huge shout out to the guys over at RCM and Flatiron Tuning for getting this over to us. It should be pretty self-explanatory and straightforward to install. So we'll actually probably start with the water pump, get the oil plate on, get the dry sump on, and then start doing some of the smaller details to get this thing looking like an OP EJ. Just like a normal oil pump, we are gonna put sealant going around the mating surface. Got our O-ring that's gonna go in right there. Oil pump plate. Dry sumps are not something that literally everybody needs. This engine and this car are going to see some decent track time. Because I haven't had more or less a car that I could just easily dedicate to the track, which is kind of what I'm doing with the Subaru here. Now the dry sump is heavily going to help with a lot of the high G turns, launches, things like that. That's going to make the oil slosh around in the pan and potentially move away from the pickup. Now there are wet sump systems that you can do to alleviate a lot of that, but if you want to be somewhat worry-free about it, a dry sump is the way to go. But there is some setup that's going to have to go into making a dry sump work efficiently. So this is not really a system where it's you install it and you're good to go and you don't have to do anything else, because there's gonna be some decent setup that we're gonna have to do to make this dry sump work properly. We'll lube this guy up, give it a little bit of love, lube. And now that we have this on, let's get the water pump on. You get the water neck elbow with this as well, which is kind of nice. I need to get a thermostat. I don't have one yet. So that's all right. We'll put a thermostat of this later, but at least this way it'll be on the engine, because I have a tendency to lose things. Dude, this is wild that I'm putting a fucking dry sump on. I built a lot of EJs, but nothing like this. Oh, the dry sump actually uses an O-ring to seal. Now these things are pretty cool. Now these have a lot of cool features, but something that's like super neat about these is the dry sump will actually scavenge the crankcase and help pull out any additional oil that might be sitting in the crankcase and send it back to our oil tank. So because we don't have a traditional oil pan, what we will have is an oil tank that is remotely installed somewhere away from the dry sump. The way that it works is it'll pull oil from our external tank and feed it into the engine. This will help deliver more constant oil pressure as the engine operates. Now, I actually had an issue with something similar in the 6-cylinder, and a dry sump is what we're gonna be using in the 6-cylinder as well. So this is gonna be an awesome introduction into the dry sump stuff to really fine tune it and learn about these a lot more. Underneath of this plate is a whole bunch of scavenge pumps, and those are what help pull them. You might see people use scavenge pumps on some like low mount turbo setups in some cars where the oil can't naturally drain back to a source. I'm probably gonna put like a little dab of sealant on this O-ring just to help it stay down as I go to install it, but boop, just a little bead there, just a little bead there, just a little bead there. Dude, it's just insane. It's insane to me. That guy's gonna sit on. Dude, that looks so wild. Not having an oil pan on an engine and just using a dry sump, this is insane. This is insanity to me. Never in my life did I think I'd have a Subaru that was gonna be able to have a dry sump. Now to adjust oil pressure, it's actually pretty easy. It's on this little set screw here, so that's a bridge we can cross later on. Don't need to worry about crossing that bridge right now. All the pumps are inlined here with the snout coming out. So similar to how a supercharger would work, this will work off of the timing. So as the engine is operating and rotating, that is what will drive the scavenge pumps to feed oil into the engine and pull oil out of the engine. Now I know I'm not the only one who's looked at these online for years and been like, God dude, one day I know we've all done it, all right? Thankfully, they do label all this for us nicely. We've got dash 10 oil pressure to the engine, so this is what's gonna feed the engine. Dash 12 oil return to the tank, so this is what's gonna fill our oil tank, our external one. This one is the 16 or 12 oil feed from the tank. So they make it so easy. Actually, if you guys remember on the 6-cylinder, I used what I would say is the more cost-effective equivalent of a dry sump, which was the oil AccuSump, which that did work and it did help to a degree, but this is like an AccuSump on steroids. And right here we have our oil filter screw, and that'll go in right here. So they make these for, Subaru actually makes these also. These are just for non-oil cooled cars. Actually toss on here as well. Just to seal up this engine a little bit more. Tighten this guy down, tighten that guy down, and then we've got one line to run. So this is 10 oil to engine. There is a crush washer with it, so we need to make sure that we do get it somewhat tight. Where the oil pump used to be still technically feeds oil. It doesn't feed oil. I guess it's just the path oil still takes to get to the engine from the dry sump. Can I rotate this away a little bit more actually? Will this go? No, it won't. That's just where it naturally wants to sit. So we'll let it naturally sit where it wants to sit. It's very nice that they actually include this line. They actually include a lot of stuff for this dry sump. I'm gonna tell you now, looking at the dry sump for my 6-cylinder, it definitely does not come with all this extra stuff. I will forewarn you that these are pretty spendy kits, right around $5,000, but I'm gonna be honest, for a lot of the other dry sump kits that I've looked at for some other engines, they give you a lot for the money, which is actually really nice. Dude, that's wild. How did I? There we go. Look how fucking cute that is, dude. That's so cool. The belt can't come off. There's a lip here that keeps the belt from coming off. That's wild. RCM also gives us this block off plate for the oil fill because we don't need to run one. Now, this is the whole reason why I put AN fittings on the block, because technically we don't really need to run a PCV system now. There we have it, an absolutely beautiful built EJ25 that's gonna be going into our 1998 2.5 RS. This thing is going to, for like that 600 to 650 wheel horsepower goal, like I was saying, this is gonna be a perfect setup. The dry sump will aid in us being able to abuse and beat on the car. This car will be seeing some track time out at the ridge. I was gonna take the RX-7, but I don't think I want to take the RX-7 out to the ridge. It's more of like a street car for funsies. So the dry sump will help alleviate a lot of worry and stress. Now, that's not as simple as just bolting it on and being good to go. There's still a lot of setup that's going to go into this once the engine goes into the car. Now, I would assemble this into a long block today. However, I am still waiting on my camshafts to come in, so that way we can get our cylinder head set up and built. So that will be happening later on. Once we get the cylinder heads, we turn this thing into a long block. It's going to be going straight into this car. So there we have it. That's the most OP EJ25 I have ever built, and I am ecstatic to get this thing running. If you're looking to do your own built motor, go ahead and hit the guys up over at Rally Sport Direct. You guys can use our discount code Smeedia over there and save some money on your engine internals. Or if you're looking for a dry sump similar to this one, hit up the guys over at Flat Irons. I believe they have them in stock right now, if this is something that you are considering doing on your own car. But that's all I got for you guys on this one. If you guys are enjoying the 22B P25 Clone car, RSTI, I don't know what to call it anymore. Call it whatever you guys want. But if you guys are liking it, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I'll put it in one of these corners. No idea which one quite yet. But if you like the video, go ahead, hit that like button, turn it black, blue, green, yellow, purple, silver, sight, and whatever color it turns for you. So with that, I will catch you guys in the next one. So peace out, homies.